Chapter 1. Callum. Another semester. Another group of students who weren't interested in learning. It was like this every year, but I still taught because the stories of the gods were still very much needed in today's society. The students who actually cared about it learned more about themselves than anyone I had met. Alpha Levi, one of my pack members, said from my university office door. I glanced up from my desk, gathered the rest of the materials for the first day of classics I taught to first and second year students, and nodded to the door to signal for him to enter. Levi shuffled into the room and closed it behind him, bowing his head. While many of the students at Arcane University in New Hampshire knew about the paranormal that haunted these woods, some, even professors, were still human. If any one of them found out about us, the Wolf Council would chew me out. What is it? I asked. Levi stuffed his hands into his ripped jeans. I spotted wolves from the Goldtooth pack at our borders. My entire body stiffened. Goldtooth pack? Are you sure? Yes. Beta Milo told me to relay the information to you. I drew my tongue across my teeth, feeling the prick of my canines. Don't engage. If the Goldtooth pack is here, they're looking for something and will do anything to find it, which includes killing our pack members. Levi nodded and stepped toward the cherry oak door. Will do, he said, and just as he was about to step out the door, I called his name. He paused in the hallway, tensing when a human professor walked opposite of him. Yeah. Go to class. I'll handle it, I ordered. But you're not missing another one of my classes. You're taking classics again. Because you failed the first time. Can't you pass me? No. After rubbing his hand across his face and grumbling under his breath, he walked down the hall toward the auditorium, where class started in 15 minutes. I hiked my bag over my shoulder, locked my office door behind me, and started toward the exit. I didn't have time to run back to my pack before class started. I had to get one of the patrols in the forest to do it. Glancing down at my watch, I shoved the door open, the crisp fall air blowing through the scruff on my face. Someone stumbled back, a phone and some classics books tumbling to the ground in the middle of the doorway. She gasped and leaned down to grab them. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. My breath caught in the back of my throat as her sweet scent drifted through the air. Mate. I crouched down and grabbed some of her books from the walkway, admiring the way strands of her dirty blonde hair blew into her face. It's my fault, I said, wanting to hear her voice again and so desperately wanting her to look at me. In a moment, she glanced up at me with piercing blue-violet eyes, cheeks flushing a rosy red. She grabbed her books from my hand, our fingers grazing against each other's. My wolf growled inside of me, demanding that he feel her skin against his again. Mate. No, I was trying to find my class and not paying attention. She stood up and brushed out her knee-length black skirt that had a slight split in it. And my wolf went wild. Is this the classics building? It is. In an attempt to control my wolf, I stuffed my hands into my pockets and clenched my fists. She was a student who didn't know the campus. It was probably her first year. Touching her was forbidden, no matter how much I wanted her right here and right now. If the Wolf Council found out about it, they'd remove me and all the other teachers who were wolves from this place. Okay, thank you. She scooted by me and into the building. I don't want to be late. Forcing myself not to turn around to grab her by the waist and pull her closer, stuff my nose into the crook of her neck and breathe her in. I inhaled her scent until it disappeared completely. I hurried toward the forest, finding the first damn wolf I came across, and told him to relay the information back to my beta. If our mind links worked for long distances, I would have done it myself. But they didn't anymore, thanks to the Wolf Council. After racing back to the building, I took a shortcut toward the auditorium, knowing that the only classics class in this building today was mine, which meant one thing. My mate would be there, sitting in one of the many desks and staring up at me with those breathtaking eyes almost every day for the rest of the semester. Stepping into the class, I scanned the room for her. Yet I couldn't pick up her scent from the 100 mixed smells of the students. I relaxed only slightly and walked down the auditorium steps to the front, giving everyone a tight smile when they looked up at me and began quieting down. I placed my bag on the front desk and looked around the room again. The door opened, her scent drifting into the room and her clumsy cute ass nearly tripping over the carpet as she walked into the room. She tucked some dirty blonde hair behind her ear, gnawed on her pretty pink bottom lip, and anxiously searched the small auditorium for a seat, brows furrowed together. I stiffened and stared at her, my heart thrashing against my chest. Mate. Canines lengthening, I pressed my lips together and let them cut into my gums. Because not everyone who attended Arcane University was a werewolf, including her. I didn't want to scare her out of my class just yet. I didn't even know her name. When she looked at me, I sucked in a breath and quickly looked away. She slowly walked down the wooden stairs of the auditorium to the second row, glanced down the aisle to see if she could find a seat. There was one right in the center, right where I could see her, look at her, watch her without it seeming creepy. Instead, she moved even closer to the front row and sat down toward my right. I inhaled her sweet beachy scent. She smelled so good, too good. I wanted to sink my teeth into her neck right here and right now, not caring who it was in front of. I needed her to be mine. So fucking badly. After sitting, she placed her laptop and phone on her desk. She chewed on her bottom lip and tapped on the messages on her phone, staring down at messages from someone that she hadn't seemed to respond to yet. A moment passed and she shook her head and shut the phone off, then looked back up at me. Being taken off guard by those breath-fucking-taking eyes, I cleared my throat and looked down at my computer screen, shifting through the names on my attendance list to find hers. In a 100-student class, I would never take attendance, but it couldn't hurt to try to spot her name. Gracie Neal, Malik Evo, Selin Flowers, Antonina Nichols, Bria Benton, Cody Spence, Malachi Herbert, Kane Wheeler. Hey, Levi said to her, sitting beside her and holding out a hand. I'm Levi. My hands balled into fists behind the desk, and I pressed my lips together to suppress a growl. While I wanted to break them apart right then and there, I wanted so desperately to hear her voice, wanted her name, needed to have more of her. Bria, she said, cheeks flushing again. She was blushing. My mate was blushing because of someone other than me. Don't touch her, I scolded Levi through the mind link. Before she could shake his hand, Levi pulled away. She widened her eyes and gave him a small, embarrassed smile, then turned back toward her computer. Levi glanced up at me, brows furrowed together, but I ignored him and cleared my throat, silencing the other students. Welcome to Classics, Ancient Mythologies. I'm Professor Lee. Let's get started. Chapter 2. BRI. Professor Lee talks so freaking fast. I type furiously on my keyboard, trying to keep up between getting all the notes down and desperately trying not to stare at him, walking around the front of the class with his biceps bulging against his tight dress shirt, dark brown scruff, and those piercing hazel eyes that I couldn't look into without warmth spreading through my core. He was the epitome of any Greek god we were learning about this semester. When I had chosen to attend Arcane University, it wasn't because of the hot professors, but that was definitely a plus. I wasn't complaining, but figured that I wouldn't retain much this semester, even though I so desperately wanted to. Mythology was my favorite subject like ever. I'll see you tomorrow bright and early, Professor Lee said, crossing his huge arms over his chest and looking oh so fine. Don't forget about the readings. Pages 3 through 18 in your textbook. After typing the last of my notes, I glanced up to see the rest of the students already either heading out the door or forming a line in front of Professor Lee to introduce themselves. My advisor told me that I should introduce myself to my teachers, but I was always so nervous around people. I told her that I wasn't going to, but Professor Lee kept glancing over at me. During class, part of me wanted to go over to him to at least apologize for bumping into him earlier. I didn't know what possessed me to do something so out of character, but I found myself lingering at the very back of the line, letting people cut me to talk to him first because my stomach was in knots. The last student said her goodbyes to him, walked out of the auditorium, and left me there alone with him. Alone with a hell of a man who I couldn't stop gawking at. He stared at me with a pair of hazel eyes and smiled. Hi, I'm Bria. I shifted from foot to foot, not knowing what to say. I didn't have anything planned to say. I didn't even have plans to come up here and introduce myself to him. If I did, I would have practiced in front of the mirror in my dorm room, until I knew I didn't look so awkward and stupid. I wanted to, He leaned against the front of his desk and thrust his hands into his pants pockets, full lips set in a small smile. Bria, he said, my name rolling off his tongue so naturally that it did something to me that it really freaking shouldn't have. Warmth gathered in my core, my heart racing a bit faster. Bria. I repeated my name like a dumbass, completely absorbed in how attractive my classics professor was. He had to be at least in his early 40s, his dark scruff decorated with silver specks and a crease between his brows. And I was just an 18-year-old kid who went to college to run away from her family. Sorry, I said quickly, cheeks flushing. I wanted to say that I'm looking forward to classics. I've been obsessed with mythology since I was like 5, so I'm excited to read some more this semester. With his intense gaze on me, I looked down at my feet and scrambled to hike my backpack up my shoulder. I should get. Which is your favorite? He asked quickly, kicking himself off the desk and moving a couple inches closer to me. My breath caught in the back of my throat, my heart pounding in my chest. My favorite? I asked almost in a whisper by how close he was. Favorite story, favorite god? Oh, Hephaestus isn't my favorite god, but I've reread stories about him a couple times. Any particular reason? Cheeks flushed, I shifted from foot to foot and tried hard not to gaze up into his hazel eyes that seemed to look right through me. I sucked in a breath and found myself staring anyway, the tension between us growing by the moment. He was close and I couldn't get myself to move away, and I didn't want to either. I don't know, I whispered. He paused and arched a hard brown brow, lips curling into a smirk. Well, you have all semester to figure it out. Everyone gravitates toward a story or a person for a reason. He lifted his finger and I thought he was going to push a strand of hair behind my ear, but instead he stopped midway and drew his fingers across the scruff on his face. What's your favorite story? I asked. After a moment he paused and cracked another breathtaking smile. You'll find out with time, Bria. When he said my name, tingles rushed through me. Anyway, I glanced down and tried hard to ignore them. Sorry for bumping into you earlier. I'll be more careful tomorrow. I took a couple steps backward. Bright and early, Professor Lee repeated. After giving him one last smile, my cheeks flaming hot, I turned on my heel and hurried up the auditorium stairs, careful not to trip again. Get yourself together, Bria, I whispered to myself once I started up the walkway toward the exit. He was my classics professor for fuck's sake, and it was the first damn day of college. It was forbidden. Chapter 3. Callum. Why are gold-toothed pack wolves near our property? I asked Milo, pacing on the cream-tiled floors of my home office. Fingers running through my scruff, I tried fucking hard to think straight, but Bria seemed to be all I could think about. Gold-toothed wolves were some of the most ruthless around, originating about 2 hours south near a beach town. They had killed 2 humans last year during tourist season, and those were only the ones the police found. I was not about to have them come near my property, especially not when my mate was human and couldn't protect herself against fiends who would do anything to get some, even if that meant raping and killing an innocent girl. Milo sat on one of my 2 saffron couches, tapping his finger against the leather. We've watched them all day and couldn't uncover the reason why they're here. Don't think we will be able to without engaging. After pushing out a breath, I shook my head and headed for the door. Don't engage unless they do first. You know what they're capable of. It's too risky for us to start anything with college back in session. Where are you going? Milo asked. I need a run. Once I grabbed a spare set of training clothes, I headed out on a needle-covered path back toward the university. I never ran on their trails, especially during school months, but my wolf had been aching to search for Bria again. It had barely been a couple hours. Find mate now. I pushed myself harder, inhaling the calming scent of softwood. Leaves rustled gently above me, rays of sun slipping through the tree branches. When I found myself jogging onto Arcane University property, I slowed and decided on a trail that would take me throughout the campus, an easy way to pick up her scent. Students sat on benches and at picnic tables, eating early dinners. Others passed a volleyball back and forth on the square. And then there was Bria, who lay on her stomach, reading her classics book for tomorrow on the lawn in front of a dormitory. Like a fucking creep, I stopped about 50 feet away from her and watched her flip page after page, smiling to herself like she was actually enjoying the reading. Nobody ever enjoyed classics books, at least not in the classes I taught. Strands of her dirty blonde hair swept into her face, and it took everything inside of me not to walk over to her and tuck them behind her ear. Goddess, I had wanted to do that this morning too. Rubbing a hand over my face, I shook my head and turned away. Couldn't fucking do this. Why the hell was I standing around and watching one of my students? If she saw me gawking at her, she could report me to the board and get me kicked out. Worse than that, the Wolf Council would find out about it. 2. I have an idea, my wolf said in my mind. What? I asked, desperate for something to get me closer to her. Before I could stop, I found myself heading right in her direction, my legs moving on their fucking own thanks to my wolf. What are you doing? I scolded. Going to talk to mate. That's your idea? When he didn't respond, I dug my heels into the ground and forced myself to stop 10 feet away. 10 fucking feet. And in the midst of the softwood and food from the cafe a street down, all I could focus on was her sweet beachy scent that did nothing but drive me fucking crazy for her. Professor Lee, someone called to my left. From the corner of my eye, I saw Bria look over at me. And being the alpha I couldn't help but feel my body tense. Not because I was nervous she saw me staring at her, but because I wanted her to like me, to find me attractive in the sea of frat boys and horny college kids from Arcane University. Hi, I said, giving the girl a small smile. Don't look over at Bria. Don't look over at Bria. Don't look over at Bria. I glanced over at Bria, my gaze lingering for a moment longer than it should've. She gave me a soft, small smile, then looked back at her textbook. When she pushed her legs a bit closer together and I smelled her cunt, I nearly lost it. Do we have, the girl started, a quiz tomorrow morning? I finished, canines extending. Yes. Don't forget to read. It was a lie. I didn't have any quiz planned for tomorrow, but I guessed I had one now because I needed to get the fuck out of here before my wolf seized complete control of my body and took Bria on the university lawn. All I could imagine was running my nose down her neck and sinking my canines into her neck, claiming her, taking her, making her mine. I bet her pussy tasted so fucking good. One damn smell of it, and my wolf had already gone wild. Turning my back toward Bria, I gave the girl a forced smile and jogged in the opposite direction, passing Levi and only stopping when I stepped into the forest. I rested my back against a tree, taking deep breaths to suppress my wolf. Hey, Levi called with a grin, jogging in Bria's direction. Bria, right? I tensed and glanced from behind the tree to see them chatting. My hands balled into fists, anger rushing through me so heavily that even with my enhanced hearing as a wolf, I couldn't seem to listen. All I saw was him making my mate smile again. After a moment, Levi nodded and turned back to the forest. When he reached me, I growled, forcing him to stop right in his damn fucking tracks. Don't touch Bria. I was just inviting her to a party. She's a first year and, unable to stop myself, I wrapped my hand around the front of his throat and thrust him against a tree, my canines lengthening past my lips and my claws, nearly cutting into his neck. Don't fucking touch her. Do you understand me? Levi widened his eyes at me. Yes. Yes. Yes, Alpha, he said, bowing his head. I shoved him away from me and looked back at Bria, who now lay on her back and shielded her eyes from the setting sun as she continued reading her classics book. I should claim her right here, right now. No horny fraternity asshole should have his hands all over my mate at a party. Bria Benton was mine. Oh, Chapter 4. Be alright. After pulling on my 5th outfit for the night, I stood in front of the mirror and sighed at my reflection. Love handles, and more freaking love handles. All of my party clothes were either too tight around the waist, that it shoved all my fat above the belt line, or fit me perfectly but didn't look sexy. There was no way that I was going to my first frat party ever looking like this. So I changed out my jeans for sweatpants and my halter top for the tank top that I slept in for the past 4 nights, then threw my hair into a messy bun. And by messy I didn't mean cute like all those girls on social media. Meant hair sticking up in every direction messy. Typing on her phone, Jasmine opened our dorm room door and glanced up at me. Why aren't you ready? I gnawed on the inside of my cheek. I'm not going. Come on, Bria. It's our first semester of college. Don't you want to have some fun? Yeah, but I don't have anything to wear. You can wear something of mine. Cutting my gaze to her, I raised a brow. She and I both knew that I would never fit into anything her petite ass could. I pop all the buttons on her shirt and stretch out her leggings until they became sweatpants on her. So, that was a no from me. She rolled her eyes. You'll look great in anything that you have. Everyone at this school is insanely small and skinny, Jasmine. It's like, everyone takes 3-hour runs every day to stay fit. I don't want to go like this. I shook my head and scrolled through my emails, finding one from Professor Lee addressed to the entire class. Class, there will be a 5-question quiz on tonight's reading. Be prepared. If you have any questions, feel free to email me back. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Sincerely, Professor Lee. Nobody cares what you look like at frat parties, Jasmine said. Half the guys are drunk off their asses anyway. They see a cute face like yours and they'll be all over you. Don't worry too much about it, Bria. Let's just go. I grabbed my classics book from my desk. I'll come next time. I have a quiz. Tomorrow. What? Who's the psycho who assigned a quiz on the first day of school? Professor Lee. You have Professor Lee? She asked with wide eyes. Isn't he the most gorgeous person that you've ever seen? Do you have him? I asked, curious as to how she found out about him already. She was a first-year student like me and wasn't taking any classics classes as far as I knew. She must have been on ratemyprofessor.com or something. She paused, opening and closing her mouth, then hurried to the door. Oh, I saw him in the hallway. One of my friends has his class. Anyway, have fun studying. Next time you're coming out with me. See ya. When she closed the door, I slumped my shoulders forward and let out a breath. That was easier than I thought it would be. At first she was so adamant about me going with her, and then she quickly dropped it. Deciding not to think so much about it, I sat at my desk, opened my book, and studied for the next 5 hours until 12 a.m. Jasmine still wasn't home yet, and even though she told me that she wouldn't be home until after 2 p.m. I was still worried. Was that what people did in college? Stay up until all hours of the night? As I closed my textbook and hopped up onto the bed, my phone lit up with an email notification. Bria, have you read this? https://www.amazon.com/ahd. Callum Lee. I gnawed on the inside of my cheek and suppressed a smile, my cheeks flushing. For no good reason at all. Professor Lee didn't sign his professional name like he did when he sent an email to the entire class earlier, but he signed his real name to me. Callum Lee. And an email after midnight? Callum, Professor Lee was up late thinking about me. Surely it didn't mean anything, but the thought of my hot professor thinking about me and our conversation this late at night did something bad to me. Pressed my thighs together, like I did while watching him run around the campus until he stopped and saw me gawking at him earlier. God, he looked so sexy with a layer of sweat covering his body and his muscles swelling underneath his shirt. I swallowed hard and clicked on the link, getting directed to a book titled The Red Hammer, which explored the tales of Hephaestus and his relationship with his mother. While I thought I read everything on that god, at least within the classics books, I hadn't touched this one yet. I made a mental note to pick it up tomorrow in the school library and typed out a quick reply back to Professor Lee, unable to stop myself. Professor Lee. It's added to my TBR list. Thanks for the recommendation. Sincerely, Bria. After scrunching my nose, I erased my sign-off, then typed the same exact words over again. I couldn't decide if it was too formal or not formal enough. But he wasn't formal at all in his email. Deciding not to overthink it, I hit send and placed my phone face down on my stomach, smiling stupidly to myself as I stared up at the ceiling. Here I was, a first-year college student, who declined attending a frat party in order to lie in her bed and get butterflies that her much older professor was emailing her this late at night. It was a damn fantasy that would never come true, a small act of good attention that I ached for. It wasn't like I ever got that at home. Shutting off my bedside lamp, I closed my eyes and felt the phone vibrate against my stomach. I tilted the phone up slightly so the brightness wouldn't blind me and shot up in the bed when I saw another email from Professor Lee. I think you'll enjoy it. It's one of my favorites. Callum. No Callum Lee this time. Just Callum. My stomach fluttered. I hugged the phone to my chest and smiled like a complete idiot at the ceiling, then shook my head and plugged my phone into the charger. I couldn't be stupid. I was making something out of nothing, and if I didn't control myself, that something was going to control me. Tomorrow I'd thank Professor Lee for the recommendation again and get the book from the library. That would be it. I'd be done with the little crush I formed because I needed to study this semester. I had worked damn hard to find the money to attend college without the help from mom or dad. I couldn't let it go to waste. Chapter 5. Callum. As promised, I passed out sheets of paper with quiz questions on the front. 5-question quiz about the assigned reading last night. For those of you who recently switched into my class, this quiz will have to be made up during office hours. After a collective groan, the room became quiet, everyone taking out pens or pencils to complete the quiz as quickly as they could so they could leave. Bria answered the questions at lightning speed, like she was ready for it, and it made me smile. In all my years of teaching, I hadn't found anyone as enthusiastic about this material as I was. But now my mate was here. When you're finished, please drop your quizzes up front. Once everyone began finishing up, Bria sat at her desk in the front row. From where I stood, I could tell that she had answered all the questions and even written an explanation for one. But she still didn't get up. It was as if she was waiting for everyone else to leave first. And when Levi, the last person to finish, stood, she did too. Bria? Levi swung his backpack over his shoulder and smiled. My blood fucking boiled. This kid didn't listen to a word I fucking said yesterday. Enjoy your night in? Jasmine said you wanted to study instead of party. Kinda. Makes you seem like a loser if you ask me. Well, if you ask me, nobody cool sounds out the word loser anymore, Bria said, gathering her notebooks and returning Levi's smirk. But I had a great time, thank you. I got some studying in and she glanced in my direction, looking right fucking at me, watching her blush, then looked away. I found my next good read. Who reads anymore? I don't. And that's why you failed my class last semester, Levi, I interrupted, loathing the fucking way he stood so close to her. I wanted to rip her away. Claim her. It hadn't even been 2 days yet, and she was already driving me wild. Bria smiled and raised her brows at Levi. Maybe you should be doing that instead of partying on a Monday night. Levi shook his head, turned to me, and handed me his paper. You know, I aced the quiz. 100%. Check it out. I glossed over the answers and raised my brows. This is good, Levi. You're off to a better start this year. I gave him my best professor smile and continued the conversation through our mind link. But if you don't stop messing with Bria Benton, you won't be. Straightening his back, Levi gave us a tense smile and waved us off. Well, I gotta get going. Don't want to be late. See ya. And with that he was off, rushing up the aisle and out of the room. After Levi exited the room, leaving Bria and me alone again, she hiked her backpack onto her shoulder and handed me her quiz. Here you go. I was stuck between 2 answers for question 4, so I wrote a detailed description as to why I thought it was the answer I chose. I took the quiz from her, my fingers brushing against her slender ones, and my wolf howled inside of me. The mere touch sent tingles up and down my arms, her scent becoming even more powerful somehow. Mate. Claim mate. After I glanced over her answers, a warmth spread throughout my chest. Oh, Bria, you've gotten everything right except? Except? She asked with big eyes, staring down at the quiz and going over the questions and answers again. She looked to be one of those students who stayed up all hours of the night studying for a simple 5-question quiz, needing to get all the answers correct. It's question 4, isn't it? Your name. She placed a hand over her heart and let out a breath, staring down at the empty line on the top of the sheet for her name. Oh gosh. You could get points taken off for such a simple mistake. I wouldn't be able to make those points up somehow? My breath caught in the back of my throat, and I didn't know if Bria really wanted extra credit or if she was flirting. All I knew was that my wolf was going wild for her right now. I needed more, a taste, something to calm him. For you, Bria, there will be extra credit, but I don't think you'll be needing it. Though I hope she would. What if I wanted it? She gnawed on the inside of her cheek, then quickly followed up with, in case I fail a quiz or an exam or something else. I want to make sure that it's an option for me. Unable to stop myself, I grasped her chin and forced her to look me in the eye. It will always be an option for you. I'll have extra credit for whenever you need it. Discipline too. Discipline, Bria whispered, shuffling her feet. So she hugged the book to her chest and lingered at her desk. I saw you running yesterday afternoon. Do you run every day around the quad? I do. Lie. I never ran around the quad, but I did now. Bria studied on the grass. Every afternoon like she had yesterday, I'd be running around this campus. Every day to see her. It was that or stalk her dorm room, which would definitely get me kicked out by the council. She became quiet, her thighs suddenly pressing together. Good to know. You're welcome to come with me sometime. Fuck, why did I fucking say that? She's my student, for goddess's sake. Instead of taking it back, because she wasn't only my student but she was my mate too. I leaned against the desk and patiently waited for her answer, my wolf growing restless inside of me every time she blushed. God no, Bria said, eyes widening in surprise. She glanced up at me through her lashes. I mean, it's not that I don't want to. I would love to run with you. Her cheeks turned even redder, as if she thought she was digging herself an even bigger grave. But I couldn't get enough of it. Eventually she looked back down at her shoes. I just hate running. Kinda with a passion. Hate running? I asked, crossing my arms. What do you do for exercise? To my surprise, Bria looked me right in the eye with her cheeks still flushing, and said, other things. Her voice was filled with a tinge of sultriness, and I couldn't stop myself from thinking about bending her right over my lap and punishing her for making me so fucking hard during class today. I inhaled the sweet scent of her salivating cunt. Goddess, Bria was going to fucking destroy me. One of these days I wouldn't be able to handle myself. I'd throw my office door open, pull her into the room and claim her with everything I had, my teeth in her neck, my tongue on her pussy, my hands all over her body. After a few moments of silence, she smiled and pulled away. Anyway, I should get going. I need to get to the library to pick up that book you suggested before my next class. I'll see you tomorrow. Don't let mate leave. Wait, I said, stuffing my hand into my bag, pulling out the red hammer, and handing it to her. I had this copy lying around back home. Take it. She stared at it with wide eyes. Are you sure? I don't want to take your personal copy. It's fine. Just return it when you're finished. I collected the messed up stack of quizzes on my desk. I hope you enjoy it. Chapter 10. BRI. The library housed thousands of books, and none of them were helpful in the slightest. I shoved another book back onto the shelf, hoping that I put it back in the right spot so that others could find it, and pulled out the next mythology book, quickly scanning the blurb for any helpful information. When this book didn't work either, I placed it back on the bookshelf and yawned. I hadn't slept since 9 p.m. last night. I had paced my small dorm room and wondered what I had done wrong. What happened within those few moments? First, Professor Lee had been so freaking adamant about pleasing me, and then, right when I was about to come, he demanded that I leave and not turn back. Maybe he really understood what he was doing. Maybe he realized that he screwed up by touching a student. Maybe I didn't know. I didn't understand it one freaking bit. He had been so possessive, so needy, and so dominant last night when he tossed me up onto his desk, ripped off my panties, and called my pussy his. What changed? Deciding that I would never know, I stepped back to scan the next higher shelf. I jumped up onto my toes to check for the book I have been searching for since 6 a.m. this morning, because last night, while I lay on Professor Lee's desk in a complete mess, I swore I saw something I had only read about in mythology books. After 3 more books, I finally pulled down a book that fit my search almost perfectly. I sighed in relief, checking the time and realizing that I would be late to mythology. I didn't really want to go back to Lee's class after what had happened last night, but I didn't want to miss the class. It really wasn't like me, and I needed not to fail this semester. I couldn't go back home to Mom and Dad. At the checkout, the overworked, undercaffeinated college kid with unkempt black hair grabbed the book from me. Greek mythology, huh? He asked, scanning the barcode and punching in a couple buttons on the computer. I don't remember Professor Lee assigning this when I was in his class. My heart raced a bit faster at the sound of his name. How do you know I take mythology with Lee? He cracked the brightest smile he could for it being a couple minutes before 8 a.m. He's the only professor to teach mythology at the university. Plus, no other classics teacher would even think about having their students read the legend of Lycaon. They're all too old and love Homer too much. True, I said, keeping up some small talk. Once I grabbed the book from him, I held it to my chest and walked out of the library doors, heading straight for classics with Professor Lee. While this book might have been related to mythology, I didn't get it for his class. I got It because last night, I swore I saw something in Professor Lee's eyes that was unexplainable. Every few moments, his eyes would flicker to a yellow gold. And every article, every social media post, every WebMD diagnosis told me that wasn't possible for a human. And, I was probably overthinking this and making things up, but I felt like I had read something about eyes shifting colors in mythology before. Opening the book, I swept through the first few pages and walked toward the Classics building, a cold wind chilling my skin. I pulled my light fall jacket closer around my body and looked up briefly to see Levi walking out from the forest, his hair a disheveled mess and his eyes glowing gold. I sucked in a sharp breath, snapped my book closed and stepped behind a building, staring at him with wide eyes as he slung a backpack over his shoulder and walked toward the Classics building, biceps swelling through his t-shirt under the early morning sunlight. How wasn't he freezing cold? I stared like a creep for a few more moments as Levi disappeared into the Classics building. I stepped back onto the walkway, blew out a deep breath, telling myself that I was sleep-deprived, and walked toward the Classics building. The closer I came to the entrance doors, the heavier my feet became. I didn't want to come here today. I wanted to slip back into my dorm room and sleep for the rest of the day, skipping all my damn classes. My stomach was in tight knots, the thought of confronting Professor Lee making me uneasy. What would I even say to him? Would he even want to talk to me? Would he acknowledge it? What if he didn't? Gosh, this was going to be even more awkward than I imagined all night. About 20 feet ahead, Jasmine walked up the steps and through the Classics building door. I stopped dead in my tracks and sucked in another sharp breath, nerves running up and down my spine and my breath catching. What was she doing here? She didn't even take any mythology or classics courses. Hell, the closest building she had a class in was the science building, which was about a quarter-mile west of here. She wouldn't step in this building if she didn't. Fuck. I balled my hands into tight fists and gritted my teeth together. If she switched into Lee's class. Unable to stop myself, I pushed my nerves to the side and hurried up the steps behind her, rushing toward the mythology classroom and stopping before the double doors. Even from here I could smell the vanilla perfume that she doused herself in every morning. No, I whispered to myself. No, she can't. After blowing out a deep breath, I looked around the doorframe and into the class. Jasmine stood at the front of the class with a skimpy, cropped tank top that showed off her toned, tanned abs and a grin that stretched from ear to ear. After tucking some hair behind her ear, she said something that I couldn't quite hear to Professor Lee, which granted her a smile from him. A fucking smile. Those lips that had told me to leave his office last night were smiling at Jasmine. I balled my hands into fists, tears welling up in my eyes, and walked back to my dorm room to read. All this time I thought that I meant something to him. But that was my fault to believe something that could never be true. Professor Lee had made a mistake last night, and there was only one way to make sure that I was never his mistake again. I was going to switch out of his class. Chapter 11. Callum. Where the fuck was Bria? I paced around the front of my classroom to lecture about Ovid, but I couldn't get my mind off of Bria or what happened last night. Every time the door opened or a pen fell or a paper flipped on someone's desk, I looked up at the exit doors to see if it was Bria Benton. She didn't seem like the type of girl to skip class. From the moment I met her, she seemed very particular and anxious about missing any sort of event, had stumbled into the Classics building in a rush. And a complete mess of nerves, hair crazy from the wind and eyes wide in fear that she'd be late. Professor Lee? Jasmine said, sitting in Bria's seat in the front row. After cursing to myself, I stood behind the podium and rubbed my sweaty palms together, giving her a nod to ask whatever kind of question she had for me. Now, she had been the only person asking questions all class, and while I would find it refreshing on any other day, I couldn't think straight now. Between Bria and Alpha Adon showing up on my property, I hadn't shut my eyes to sleep once last night. He had threatened me with war if I didn't find him information on a new student at the university, and normally I would gladly accept war with someone like him. But I had Bria to worry about now, and she still hadn't shown up. Can you give us your opinion on mythology and pop culture? Jasmine asked. I blew a steady breath through my nose so as to not come off as pissed off to my other students and gave her a tense smile. Maybe some other time. We have an exam in a couple weeks and need to get through this material. An exam already? She asked, the rest of the class starting to groan about. Yes, Jasmine, I said, wanting nothing more than to scold her through our mind link. Once I guided the class back into the material, I finished my lecture early, placed my hands on either side of the podium and tightened my grip until the students started to pile out of the classroom. My mind reeled with thoughts, worries, scenarios about what could have happened to Bria. What if someone tipped Alpha Adon off that I had been paying special attention to Bria? What if he took her as collateral until I found him that fucking information? Which I wouldn't, but I needed to at least make it seem like I was until I could come up with a plan. He had our pack in this school surrounded. After class, Jasmine walked up to me with a grin on her face. Professor Lee. Where's Bria? I asked bluntly, unable to hold myself back any longer. Jasmine might have been part of my pack, but my mate was somewhere on campus. Thinking that I pushed her away last night because I was a shitty person. Needed to talk to her, and I needed to talk to her now. I didn't care where she was. I would hunt her down. I don't know, Jasmine said. Matter of fact, I haven't seen her since yesterday. You haven't seen her since yesterday? I growled. Why didn't you tell me? She widened her eyes even more and shook her head. I didn't know that you wanted to know about her. She's just a human. There are tons of girls like her in this school. She furrowed her brows and glanced back up at me. Oh, my goddess, she's your mate, isn't she? Pressing my lips together, I closed my eyes and blew out a breath. I didn't want anyone to find out yet. I had Adon and the council to worry about, and I needed to keep Bria safe. But it was difficult to keep something like this a secret to everyone around, especially when Bria was my mate. Yes, she's my mate, I said, lowering my voice so nobody else would hear. Jasmine straightened out her shoulders, pulled up her shirt to cover her breasts, and looked down at her feet. Sorry, I didn't know. If I had, I wouldn't have, switched into your class or, It's fine, Jasmine. I rubbed a hand across my face. I need you to watch and protect her for me. If you find her today, please tell me. I haven't seen her since last night, and we have a pack on our borders ready to attack. Jasmine nodded. I'll let you know, Alpha. And with that, she turned on her heel and hurried up the auditorium steps. Beta Milo cleared his throat and waited by the door. Jasmine passed him and bowed her head, scurrying down the hallway. I snapped my textbook shut, on edge and needing to find Bria to make sure that she was safe. I didn't want to deal with pack drama right now or Alpha Adon. I needed to be with her. She drove me fucking crazy without even trying. What's wrong? I asked, running a hand through my hair. Alpha Adon is looking for one of your students. My stomach tightened in knots. Who? Bria. Chapter 13. Callum. Yours, Bria whispered, fiddling with the buttons on my shirt. I'm yours. Listening to the words come out of her mouth made me feel so good. I had waited 43 years to find my mate, 43 long, lonely years. And I so desperately wanted to really have her, wanted to sink my teeth into her pretty neck and claim her as my own. But she was a human. She'd need time to adjust to the reality of me being a man who could transform into a feral, savage, violent wolf. She'd need even more time to make that shift herself. Plenty of humans didn't survive their first transformation, and I wanted to make my Bria strong enough. I couldn't lose her. You're mine, I repeated. Only yours, she asked again, her breath hitching. Only mine. But I'm your student. And she was my mate too, but I couldn't tell her that. She wouldn't understand. Not yet. That doesn't make a difference to me, I said, taking her chin in my hand and forcing her to look up at me with those big, beautiful eyes. I will have you. No matter who you are to me, no matter who tries to take you away from me, no matter what. I moved closer to her to whisper in her ear. You will forever be mine. After inhaling sharply, Bria shuffled awkwardly between me and the door and tried to hide a grin. I could smell her cunt again. She loved this. She loved the mere thought of her being mine forever and always. I'd be lying if I said I didn't love it too. Her phone buzzed and she jumped up in surprise. I have to get to my next class. Reluctantly, I stepped away from her, leaned against my desk and crossed my arms over my chest. We have a quiz tomorrow. You'd better be in class bright and early, Bria, or else I'll come and find you. Bria pressed her lips together to suppress a smile. And do what? A growl escaped my lips, which made Bria widen her eyes in excitement. Or I'll drag you back here from your dorm room and lay you over my knee. Cheeks flushing red, she grasped the door handle. I guess I'll sleep in. Tomorrow. My lips curled into a smirk. The thought of Bria lying across my lap with my hand smacking her ass until it was red made me hard. She would be in class tomorrow, but one day I was sure that I'd get to spank her until her pussy was sopping fucking wet for me. Just as she was about to exit the room, she paused and glanced under my shelf. Can I have my library book back? After glancing under the shelf, I tensed when I saw the legend of Lycaon glimmering under the dark shelf like an ancient artifact aching to be found. Picking it up, I held it in my hands and gestured toward it. Why do you want this? This wasn't just any book. This was a Greek mythology book about the first Lycaon. Bria inhaled sharply and chewed on the inside of her lip, making eye contact with me for the briefest moment, but then looking away as if she was afraid of what I'd say or what I'd do. Because I do. For a class. No. For pleasure. Kinda. I handed the book back to her after a couple moments. She took it from me and held it to her chest, swallowing hard and glancing back up at me. With that, she opened the door and walked out. At the very last moment, she turned around and threw me a smile over her shoulder. And Professor Lee, I never switched out of your class. She disappeared down the hall and around the corner. I stood in my office with my lips pulled into a smile. Bria knew exactly what she was doing when she showed up at my office with that book in her hands. She wanted me to get angry, to get possessive and jealous. She got what she wanted. When I heard the Classics building door close, I locked my office door and followed Bria's scent. Danger still lingered on this campus and I wouldn't let Alpha Adon take my mate, especially now that I was so fucking close to having her. Bria walked through the quad, waving to a couple people including Levi, then walked through the English building doors. I watched her disappear into the building and marched up to Levi, who lay on the grass with his shirt off and a pair of sunglasses on his face. What's up? He asked me, leaning back on his elbows and crossing his ankles. I need you to keep an eye on Bria, I said through clenched teeth, even though I absolutely hated the thought of it. It was less suspicious if Levi and Jasmine were watching her too, especially when I needed to teach class or had pack business to take care of. Levi lifted his sunglasses to his forehead. You're serious? Yes. I thought you wanted me to stay away from her. I don't want you touching her or flirting with her, I snapped. But I need you to protect her. Alpha Adon is getting closer to the university and he's looking for her. You and Jasmine are the only people who know Bria and who I trust to keep her safe. Brows drawn together, Levi paused for a couple moments, then tensed. Goddess. She's our Lou. I growled to shut him up really quick. Don't fucking say it out loud, I scolded. I don't know who is listening and working for Adon. All I need you and Jasmine to do is protect her while I'm not around. Levi stood and nodded. You can count on me. Narrowing my eyes, I arched a brow at him. No flirting. No flirting. No touching. No touching, Levi repeated. The thought of anyone touching my mate made me more than rageful. Unable to stop myself, I wrapped my hand around his neck and let my canines lengthen enough for him to see them. If I find out that you have done either, or let anyone do either to her, I will personally rip your throat out and feed it to you. My words came out harsh, but I couldn't help them. Bria was my mate who would only ever be with me. She wouldn't be touched by another man. Bria's mine. Chapter 14. BRI. For dinner, Jasmine and I sat at a high-top table at Lunar Chamber, a college restaurant about a block from campus. Jasmine sipped on a lemonade, eyeing a couple of alcoholic drinks our waiter brought another group of students. She nudged me. You think if I flirt with him he'd bring us some? I arched a brow, annoyance bubbling inside me. I thought you were set on flirting with Professor Lee. Don't get me wrong. I was all for her flirting with whoever she wanted, but I was still pissed off at her that she switched into Lee's class to flirt with him. He had told me that I was his and would forever be his, but sometimes people lied to get what they wanted. My parents had made sure I knew that. Though I didn't think he would lie to me too. He seemed genuine. I didn't like the thought of my roommate being all over him. If I was his, that meant that he was mine and I wouldn't let anyone else touch him. I hadn't ever been in a relationship like this before, had never had someone pay this much attention to me. I wasn't going to give that up. Jasmine snorted. Not anymore. Sitting up taller, I glanced at her. What do you mean? Ugh. Jasmine wrinkled her nose. I'm not interested in him. I realize that. He's too old for me. Next year, he'll be wobbling around with a cane. My lips curled into a smile, and I couldn't help but giggle at the thought of Callum Lee with a cane. He was way too ripped, walked around with way too much confidence, and looked way too sexy for that to be him next year. Jasmine took a sip of her lemonade. Professor Lee is all yours, Bria. What about me? Levi said, scooting onto the third stool. Who gets me? Jasmine choked on her drink and held a hand to her chest. I know you did not. Just say that. Levi wiggled his eyebrows at her. You know I did, babe. Jasmine kicked him in the shin underneath the table with the tip of her high heel. He grunted and tensed, raising his brows and looking down at the table. Damn. I deserved that. After a moment of recovery, Levi looked over at me. What are you ladies up to? Jasmine wanted to. Curling her arm around my shoulders, Jasmine pulled me closer. Talking about how Bria wants to ride Professor Lee. My eyes widened, cheeks flushing. I smacked Jasmine in the shoulder and glared at her, not wanting the entire world to find out that I liked him, especially like that. I hadn't told Jasmine what happened between us, but I didn't want any rumors flying around campus. Same though, Levi said, sitting back and grabbing a beer from the waiter. Lips curling into a wider smile, I laughed and grabbed a fry from my plate. I don't know if Professor Lee likes you back, Levi, I teased. He kept glaring at you all class yesterday. I was scared that he'd rip your throat out. Levi chuckled tensely and scratched the back of his head. Yeah, rip out my throat. Jasmine bumped her shoulder into mine. Maybe you can make your move on him during the full moon party next Friday. The full moon party will be the perfect time, Levi said, stealing a fry from my plate and nodding to Jasmine with a sly smirk on his face. He won't be able to resist her then. He'll turn into a wild animal. Again Jasmine kicked Levi in the shin. I furrowed my brows at the intense and silent exchange between the two. Levi seemed like the type of guy to spill a bit too much information, which could definitely be useful at some point. Maybe. What's a full moon party? During the first full moon of the school year, the university throws a party for new freshmen to celebrate. Levi leaned back and glanced around the room. Last year, the party was a rager. The waiter came over with the checks and I handed him a few dollars, then I slid off the chair and walked with Jasmine and Levi toward the exit. People waved to Jasmine and Levi as we walked by, slapping them on their backs like they had known them for years. Jasmine looped her arm around mine and pushed through the doors, stepping into the crisp fall night. I inched closer to her, freezing at the wind, which she seemed to be fine with even in a tank top and some shorts. You have to go, Jasmine said. It's so fun. You've been before? I asked. My friends and I used to sneak into the party while we were still in high school. You live around here? We both do, Levi said, shoving his hands into his jeans pockets. Many of the students that go here come from around the forest that surrounds the university. That's why we know the majority of them. Oh, I said, brows furrowed. I didn't think that there were that many communities around here. The school seems pretty secluded. Levi and Jasmine shared another tense glance. Then Jasmine cleared her throat. It is, she said. We live a bit south, about 45 minutes from here. Suddenly howls erupted through the forest. I tensed and found myself stopping and gazing into the dark woods, my heart pounding in my chest. Another howl sounded, then another. It sounded like a pack of wolves. Jasmine tugged on my wrist a bit harder and dragged me toward our dorm with Levi in tow. Let's get back inside. It's getting late, and don't you have to be up early for Professor Lee's class? You don't want to miss too many classes, or else he'll deduct some points. I chewed on the inside of my lip. Are there wolves around here? Both Levi and Jasmine stayed quiet. Levi finally nodded and opened the front dorm door for me. Yes, I've seen them around here for a few years now, but usually they're not dangerous. A loud yowl sounded through the dark forest. Not dangerous? I whispered. That sounded like one of them was in pain, and lots of it like one attacked the other, or worse, one attacked a student. Jasmine pulled me into the stuffy building and waved Levi off. See you tomorrow. After a couple moments, Levi rounded the building's corner and disappeared into the night, heading right for the noise. I swallowed hard and watched him run off. Something wasn't right, and I wanted to find out what it was. Chapter 16. Bri. I didn't even mean to ask Callum about lichens and werewolves. The words seemed to tumble out of my mouth. But now that I had said them out loud, I so desperately wanted his answer because some things weren't adding up. Professor Lee stared down at me with wide hazel eyes. Instead of telling me that all the fantasies in my head were true, he let out a small chuckle, the deep sound making me warm in all the right places. Where did you hear that? I've just been reading, I whispered. Did you finish The Legend of Lycaon? Yes. Did you like it? Yes. Did you? Why aren't you answering my question? I asked. Again, Professor Lee widened his eyes and ran a hand through his scruff. If there was anything I learned in that book, it was that some wolves, especially male wolves, the alpha type, didn't like to be confronted and didn't like disobedience. Lee liked neither. Still, I could barely believe werewolves existed myself. The thought was so outlandish that it was laughable. If werewolves existed, surely the government would have discovered them by now. I didn't think any government would be okay with having supernatural creatures roaming around. In Greek mythology, I think people believed in. No, I said, somehow and somewhere finding the courage to talk back to him. I want to know what you think about them here and now. Not in Greek mythology. In today's time period and in today's world. Do you think they exist? Callum stared at me for a few moments, jaw twitching and a sudden flash of gold in his eyes. After stepping away from me, he glanced at his desk. Why would I believe in something like that, Bria? So you don't think they're real? I asked, moving closer. Part of me wanted him to break. After finishing that mythology book about wolves, I researched online and found a whole slew of dirty, smutty romance books about werewolves, especially alpha wolves, and I might have touched myself while reading a couple. A couple of silently tense moments passed between us. The heat grew between my legs as I thought back to those books. The violent and vicious nature of a man who grew claws and canines during a full moon. The possessive claiming and marking on another, the pure aggression that every wolf had. Fuck. They were all made-up stories, but I couldn't stop thinking about them. Truth was that I kinda wished that Professor Lee would snap and show me his canines, sink them into my neck and take me. That'd be the damn highlight of my entire life. No, Professor Lee finally said, but he was lying. He couldn't look me in the eye anymore. So, you don't believe in people who can lengthen their stubby nails into sharp claws? No. What about people who can extend their teeth into viciously long canines? No. And their eyes? I said, my voice lower. It might be easy for someone to hide claws and balled fists or canines behind their lips, but eyes that change to gold. The more I said, the harder my heart pounded. Nobody can hide their eyes changing colors. Eyes don't change colors, Miss Benton. Callum placed his hands on the desk, every muscle in his back flexing so hard that I wanted to run my hands all over his top body. It's impossible. But it wasn't. Professor Lee wasn't the only man whose eyes flashed gold that I'd seen. Adon had eyes like that too. You should get back to your dorm, Bria, Professor Lee said, grabbing a shirt from his closet and holding open the door for me. After he tugged the shirt over his head, he followed me out of the room and down the hallway. We have a quiz tomorrow morning. I hope that you studied. He thought he was good at changing the conversation. Yeah, I said, playing along with him. I did. You have to make up your quiz from today too. Can I do that in office hours? I asked, moving closer to him when we stepped out into the chilly fall night. Goosebumps rose on my skin and I wrapped my arms around myself to keep warm. Professor Lee chuckled lowly. I don't have office hours tomorrow. You wouldn't open them up for me? Hell, I didn't know where all this confidence was coming from, but I liked it. And I couldn't stop flirting with him. Every day that passed, I felt the need to be closer to him, for him to take me, for him to crave me. Maybe I was lonely from all the years I spent by myself back at home. This was the first real thing I had. When we approached my dorm building, Professor Lee stared at me with those beautiful hazel eyes that seemed to twinkle under the moonlight. I don't make special requests, Miss Benton. Not usually. But for me. He smiled and turned away. I'll set aside an evening for you, Bria. Anytime. When I made it up to the dorm room, I heard two voices inside, so I stopped and pressed my ear to the door. Lee is going to kill us, Jasmine whisper yelled behind our door. What are we going to do? Where could she have gone off to? She barely leaves the dorm room to go anywhere. Why would she just Suddenly, Jasmine stopped and I backed away from the door. Fuck. Had she caught me? A moment later, the door swung open. Bria! Jasmine scolded when I walked back into my dorm room. When I left, she had been sleeping soundly, but now, Levi sat on her bed as she ran over to me. Worried. Where the hell have you been? I shifted from foot to foot. Out. You can't go out at 2 in the morning, Jasmine said, teeth grinding together. Something could have happened to you. If you're going to go out, tell me before you leave. I'll come with you. I didn't want to wake you. Well, don't do that again, please. Levi hopped off Jasmine's bed and walked over to me, brows drawn together. He took a couple strands of my hair in his hand and sniffed me, freaking sniffed me like a dog would. You've been out with Professor Lee. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Levi glanced over his shoulder at Jasmine, and for the second time tonight, they shared a silent look that I couldn't decipher. I pulled my hair away from him and marched over to my bed, kicked off my shoes and wiggled out of my jeans. I was too tired to get scolded by my friends. Whoa, 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 whoa. Levi covered his eyes with his hands. You can't strip in front of me. He'll kill me if I. Jasmine elbowed him hard in the ribs and jumped onto her bed, looking way more relaxed than she had a couple moments ago. Were you out with Professor Lee? She asked, wiggling her eyebrows at me. I pulled on some sweatpants. Maybe. Girl details. Now, Jasmine said, even though it was 2 in the morning and we had class bright and early tomorrow in Professor Lee's classics class. I both wanted to spill everything and tell her nothing. Professor Lee was mine, and I didn't want to share any details about him with anyone else. Once I dressed in my pajamas, Levi finally pulled his hands away from his face, said something about not wanting to lose his eyes, and jumped on Jasmine's bed with her. You know what they were probably doing. He winked, causing Jasmine to scrunch her nose. Can you not? What? Levi said. Don't be weird. How am I being weird? We haven't had sex, I said sharply. But damn, did I want to. Levi's mouth dropped open. You haven't? No. He threw his head back and chuckled. Oh my goddess. What is he waiting for? If he keeps holding back, he's going to lose control during the full moon party. Levi smacked his hands together, as if he was happy or excited about something. Jasmine rolled her eyes. Ugh, why do I keep you around? Levi wiggled his brows. Because you love me, babe. She shoved him off her bed. Don't call me that. I gnawed on the inside of my cheek and lay back on my bed staring up at the ceiling. My chest tightened. Do you think that he has lost control with other students before? I can't be the only one, right? Jasmine and Levi stayed quiet for a couple moments. When I looked over at them, Levi shook his head. I'm only a second-year student, but when I took his class last year, he barely spoke to anyone. Nobody really enjoys his class because it's classics. And I mean, who likes classics? I do. Well, of course you do. You're his. He paused and glanced over at an angry Jasmine. Favorite student. Jasmine hopped off the bed, placed her hands on Levi's back and pushed him toward the dorm room door. Levi has to go now. She marched right out of the door with him and slammed it behind her, and they started bickering back and forth like an old couple outside. I pulled the blankets over my head, turned onto my side and pulled out my phone, staring down at the steamy werewolf stories that I had been reading earlier. Callum would lose control during the full moon party, huh? My lips curled into a smile. Good, because I'd do everything in my power to make that happen. I wanted to see who the real Callum. Chapter 17. Callum. Throughout this past week, I had tried hard to stay away from Bria as much as I could. I didn't want any of my pack members to pick up on the fact that I paid special attention to her, as any one of them could rat me out to Alpha Adon in fear. They wouldn't, but if he threatened them with their lives, they might, and then I'd punish them. But every fucking day that passed, it was harder to contain myself. The full moon would be here in one fucking day, and I wanted so desperately to bend Bria over my desk and have my way with her. I didn't know how much longer I'd be able to last. And besides, Bria already knew too much. Remember, we have an exam on Monday on chapters 5 through 8 in your textbook, I said, staring into the lecture hall at the hundreds of people who were way more worried about the full moon party on campus tomorrow night rather than a classics exam. I crossed my arms over my chest, eyes lingering on Bria for a moment. Gee, gnawed on the inside of her lip and shifted in her seat. Her sweet cunt almost. Too much to handle. Bria Benton was half my fucking age but the sexiest damn thing I had ever seen. I couldn't wait to finally have her. My teeth ached for a moment, the way they usually did before they elongated. Had to put distance between us as soon as possible. Adon had been pushing for information all fucking week and I was fucking terrified that if I turned Bria he'd be able to sense it. Class is dismissed, I said quickly. Bria, please stay back for a moment. Fuck. Why'd I say that? Her eyes widened slightly as everyone started packing up their things ready to get out of class for the weekend. What the hell was wrong with me? As hard as I tried, as much as I needed to stay away, I couldn't, no matter what I did. What's he want? Jasmine asked her, arching a brow. She shrugged and gathered her things, pushing them into her backpack. I'm not sure, she said, glancing over at me with those pretty eyes of hers. I leaned against my desk, biceps flexed hard, and stared at her, feeling my eyes shift colors. Shit. Well, Levi shoved some books in his backpack and paused as the room started to clear out. I'll see you at the full moon party tomorrow. Jasmine squealed. I can't wait for it. It's been the talk of campus for weeks now. She and Levi hurried down the walkway to the doors and exited the room along with the rest of the students. After sucking in a breath, Bria walked to the front of the room toward me. You wanted to see me? She asked. And I tried so hard to keep myself calm, but her scent was drifting into my nose and making me so fucking hard. I stared at her, the vein in my neck pulsing wildly. After a few moments I cleared my throat and walked around the desk to gather my things, avoiding eye contact with her, but really I just needed to hide my raging boner. Are you prepared for the exam? Her brows furrowed together. Yes, I hope. I paused and glanced up at her through the dark-framed glasses on my face. It's going to be hard. My tongue glided against my front teeth, like my fucking cock when I bury it inside you. You should study this weekend for all weekend. This time she paused and nodded. I'm planning to study all Saturday and Sunday. I stepped closer to her and pressed my lips together. And tomorrow night? Tomorrow night I'm going to the full moon party, she said. I dug my fingers into the desk, so hard that the metal dented slightly. You shouldn't go, I said, needing to keep her away. You shouldn't go to the full moon party. Why? She asked, brows furrowed together. It's like every other party. I'll be able to study for your class, Professor L. I don't care about you studying for my class, I said, my words jarring. Warning almost. Her eyes widened slightly at me, and I straightened myself out and cleared my throat. I took a deep breath. I'm looking out for you. Those parties get wild. People don't care what they do to girls like you. She parted her lips to say something to me, but she couldn't seem to get any words out. Why are you telling me this? She finally asked, cheek sucked in and gaze on me looking like she would when she was sucking my fuck. I tore my gaze away from her and clenched my jaw. I'm warning you. People get wild under the full moon. It would be best if you stayed home to be safe. I paused and pulled my computer bag over my shoulder. I will see you bright and early on Monday for our exam. Have a good weekend. 1 moment passed, then 2, and I wanted her to stay, but I couldn't. Instead, I gestured for her to leave the room. She stared at me for another moment and swallowed hard, a wicked glint in her eyes. See you on Monday. On Friday night, I paced my pack house. Bria wouldn't stay home. She'd go to that party out of spite. She wanted me to break and fuck. I was going to. But I refused to go to that party because if she wasn't out, I knew that I'd end up ripping my way into her dorm room and taking her. The moon was full. And I had no fucking control tonight. None. Every other full moon I could control myself. But this one was different. This one, I had already found my mate, and I would go to great lengths to finally have her, which couldn't fucking happen with Adon lurking close by. Milo appeared in the hallway, arms crossed over his chest. You should rethink attending that party tonight. I know you don't want to go, but Alpha Adon has been spotted, lingering about a mile south of the university. A vicious growl escaped my throat. What? Our tracker spotted him. No rage rushing through me, I balled my hands into fists and hurled one at the wall, my hand punching right through the drywall. Fuck no. I paced faster, my teeth elongating into canines and my claws extended. Fuck. Bria is going to be there. She is there, Milo started. But before he could finish, I ran out the front door and shifted. The full moon took control of me and my wolf, forcing me to find Bria, ordering me to protect her, desperate for me to claim her. And tonight